Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. I thank you all for watching and welcome to my YouTube channel, Philosophy Clips. In this philosophy clip, I'm going to continue my discussion of the ethical issue of human enhancement, human genetic enhancement. If you haven't seen part 1 of my video series on this topic, I recommend that you do so. It'll make this video make much more sense to you. So this will be part 2 of my video discussion of human genetic enhancement. In part 1, I did all the conceptual work, or at least quite a bit of it, where I laid out what the relevant sense of human enhancement is, and then I briefly introduced Julian Savulescu and his pro-enhancement position. So this is part 2 of my video series, and what I want to do here is pick up where I left off, and I want to dive into Savulescu's 3 arguments for the claim that it's permissible to use human genetic enhancement were we to have it available to us. And we'll talk more about the ways in which it has to be available to us in order for Savulescu's arguments to go through. He's aware of these conditions, so we'll get there, but let's just run the arguments. The first argument is going to be the bad parents argument. The second argument is going to be the argument from environmental enhancement, and then the third one will be the argument from the treatment of diseases. So that's the taxonomy of arguments. Let's go ahead and dive in. The bad parents argument. Argument 1 for the pro-enhancement position by Julian Savulescu. And again, maybe I should just remind you the paper that I'll be talking about from Savulescu is Genetic Interventions and the Ethics of the Enhancement of Human Beings. Genetic Interventions and the Ethics of the Enhancement of Human Beings. Julian Savulescu. Here we go. Bad parents argument. So in order for this argument to be understandable, let me tell you about 2 parents. Neglectful parent and lazy parent. Neglectful parent is neglectful parent because she has a child that was born with advanced levels of cognition. So this child's just super smart. She's told, look, you have to provide your child with some readily accessible supplements regularly in order to foster the development of your child's cognition. If you don't, then your child's cognitive abilities will decrease to average levels. Now the thought here is that improving or sustaining high cognition levels is the kind of thing that will, all things being equal, make someone's life go better for them. Okay? It's not always the case, but it's pretty typically the case. Let's go ahead and assume that in the case of the neglectful parent, that her child would live a better life if that child were given the relevant, readily accessible supplement. Neglectful parent fails to give her child the supplement, so the child's cognitive abilities plummet to average levels. Savulescu claims that neglectful parent's behavior, intuitively speaking, is wrong, morally speaking. She shouldn't be punished, etc., for this moral wrongness, but she does something wrong. Why? It's not because she doesn't do that which is best for her child. She just doesn't do what seems like it's minimally required for her child, providing your child with a readily available supplement that would improve the child's life. Certainly doesn't involve doing her best in this case that neglectful parent fails to provide the child with the supplement. So that's a neglectful parent. The next case is the case of lazy parent. Now lazy parent is going to be a lot like neglectful parent. In this case, lazy parent has a child that's born with quote-unquote average levels of cognitive abilities. But as it turns out, all lazy parent has to do is provide her child with a supplement. And that supplement, guess what, will increase dramatically the cognitive abilities of her child. But lazy parent, like neglectful parent, fails to provide the supplement. Not because she didn't do what's best, but she didn't do what seems like what's minimally required of her for her child to make her child's life go well for her. Lazy parent, argues Savulescu, just as a neglectful parent does something wrong, does something morally wrong. Not punishable by the law, of course, but does something morally wrong. So we have neglectful parent, behavior is morally wrong. Lazy parent, behavior is morally wrong. Well, here's the next step. Let me introduce another parent. A parent that has available to him a range of biomedical enhancements, biomedical enhancement goods. So we're supposed to suppose that these enhancement goods are readily available. Certainly wouldn't require of this parent that he does his best for his child. He just does what's minimally required of him for the sake of his child. So these goods are readily available, fairly, evenly distributed across society, right? Affordable, etc., etc. Call this a non-enhancement parent because this parent, like lazy parent before him, neglectful parent before him also, fails to provide the child with the relevant goods, in this case, the enhancement goods. But just like neglectful and lazy parent, the non-enhancement parent's behavior is also morally wrong. All of their behaviors, argues Savulescu, are on a moral par with each other, or on an immoral par with each other. They all do wrong. But if it's the case that, in the case of the non-enhancement parent, that he does wrong by not providing his child with the enhancement goods, then it looks like he's required to have provided his child with the enhancement goods, permissible to use the non-enhancement goods. It looks like we've got an argument for the pro-enhancement position. So that's the bad parents argument. Okay? Now keep in mind, and Savulescu is aware of this, in order for the argument to go through, it has to be the case that the relevant enhancement goods, the biomedical treatments for the child, they're readily available. Again, that they're affordable, they're equally distributed in the society, the parent, the non-enhancement parent, has access to them, okay, just as a parent may have access to a supplement at a pharmacy or a store or something like that. Okay, so if you wanted to respond to that argument, one way you might want to say, it's a big question whether or not the enhancement goods can be as readily available as a vitamin or a supplement that one would pick up at a pharmacy or a drugstore or something like that. Okay, but we needn't dive too deeply into evaluation at this point. Let's just try to understand. Next argument, the argument from environmental enhancement. Savulescu calls this a consistency argument. So the idea here being that we think it's perfectly fine to use an environment, our child's environment, in order to enhance her life. So to be consistent, we should use biomedical technology to improve our child's life. That's why it's called the consistency argument, but it's also called what I like to call the argument from environmental enhancement, because it begins with thinking about environmental enhancement and it says, guess what? There's no moral difference between environmental enhancement, as it turns out, and genetic enhancement. So if it's permissible for parents to feed their children, healthy foods, if it's permissible to educate one's children, if it's permissible to put children in music lessons, dance lessons, put them in team sports, etc., etc., etc. If it's permissible to do those things, those all involve manipulating the environment, then the argument is there's no moral difference between doing those things and influencing the genetic expressions of one's child through biomedical treatments. Okay, so why do I think that that's true? Why do I think there's no moral difference between them? Well, what Savulescu wants to say is, look, the connection between, the relationship between the environment on the one hand and genetics on the other is such that there is an intimate relationship. Genes are always expressing themselves in the context of an environment, and environments influence the expressions of genes. So you've probably heard about the nurture-nature debate, the nature-nurture debate, whichever way you want to put it. This is in that ballpark for sure. So what Savulescu wants to say is the best science tells us that the environment influences our genetics. And so if we can alter environments which are going to influence one's genetics, the genetics of our children, then why can't we influence the genetics, as it were, more closely? Like we can provide sort of environments in the relevant child's system that influences how the genes express themselves, or we can do direct genetic engineering, which will obviously alter the expressions of the genes. So the best science, says Savulescu, is in this area is known as genetic interactionism, and it's a view that goes against the outmoded view known as genetic determinism, which says that it doesn't matter what environment your genes are in, they're going to express themselves as they do. Okay, the way of understanding genetic determinism straightforwardly would be that the expression of a gene is determined if it's necessarily the case on the basis of past expressions of genes, and that goes against the best science. So given the intimate relationship between our environment and our genetics, we should think there's no moral difference between environmental enhancement and genetic enhancement on the other. That's the big picture argument there. The third argument, making progress here. The argument from the treatment of diseases. Hey, look, we think it's perfectly permissible, don't we, to treat diseases? Why? Why is it perfectly permissible? According to Savulescu, that's because it improves well-being levels of patients. Good. Well, what about genetic enhancement? It also improves the well-being levels of those who are receiving the treatments, however young they are when they receive them, however tiny they are when they receive them. So it looks like there's no morally relevant difference between them, because morally speaking, what's at stake here would be well-being levels being improved. So we think that improving well-being is sufficient to establish the permissibility of treating diseases. We should also think that well-being levels being improved is sufficient to establish the permissibility of using biomedical technology goods to enhance, not just to, use them for therapeutic purposes, but to enhance. And so at this point, Savulescu is like, yeah, of course, we need an account of well-being. So he wants to identify some things that would count as contributing to our well-being without having to say this is definitively the correct theory of well-being. He thinks that much work needs to be done on this. This is where philosophers and social scientists need to come together to work on coming to the proper account of human well-being. And he wants to claim that there are some all-purpose goods that make lives go well, things associated with having self-control, but also having high intelligence levels, having patience, having empathy, having a cheerful disposition even. These are kind of all-purpose goods that contribute to our lives going well. And if we can use technologies to bring about these traits, these states in our children, in our people, then we should use the technology in question. So those are three arguments that Savulescu runs for the permissibility of using human enhancement, biomedical human enhancement to improve human beings' lives. Now, Savulescu wants to claim, by way of conclusion, that there still is a lot of work that has to be done before we can have a society or have a world where enhancement goods are being made available in a permissible way to citizens of that world. We need to make sure that the enhancement goods can be fairly distributed, that there are there are principles of equality. They're called principles of distributive justice in place that govern how it is that we distribute the enhancement goods. We need to make sure that we're not using overly invasive technologies in the use of the enhancement goods. We need to make sure that we're not harming or otherwise compromising the autonomy of those who would receive the enhancement goods. We need to make sure that parents are free to use these treatments on their children. It can't be a coercive system in place, right? And this, Savulescu claims, makes his position one that's far better than systems that would have enhancement be coercive. So thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any questions, be sure to let me know.